My knife was still warm when they drove it into the ice.
Rourke stood over my makeshift grave marker and said absolutely nothing. Around him, 7 men shifted in that white silence, rifles held low. Their breath rose in thin, pale threads above their balaclavas. The northeast wind came in long, flat sheets, carrying snow that cut like ground glass. No one looked at that mound. They couldn't. That mound was where I was supposed to be. 3 hours earlier, I was behind them, covering their retreat through the Nordvik Pass. 3 hours ago, my voice was in their earpieces, calm and methodical. I was reading wind and distance with the flat precision of a grocery list. Wind 9 knots northeast. Elevation drop 40 meters. Hold. Then the explosion. Not a rifle crack or the pop of a grenade. Something deliberate, something shaped. That kind of detonation doesn't happen by accident in a mountain pass. Only 3 people in the entire Joint Command even knew that pass existed. The snow wall on the eastern ridge came down in one terrible exhale. Tons of ice and frozen earth cascaded into the narrow throat of the pass. It swallowed the ridgeline where I lay. It swallowed my hide position. My ghillie-wrapped silhouette, the H&H 408 from Tbilisi. It swallowed everything in 4 seconds. Rourke screamed my call sign into the radio. Nothing. He screamed it again. Static. Recon specialist Marcus Webb grabbed his arm. Sir, we have to move. There are 4 more shooters inbound from the ridge." I know. He pulled free and stood by the avalanche debris for exactly 11 seconds. He counted them, and then he turned and ordered the extraction. They moved. They survived. They should not have. Stick with me. Now they stood at the mound they had returned to build. 7 men in winter whites dug through 2 meters of snow with their hands and shovels, working until they found what they came to confirm. They found my ghillie wrap. They found the rifle case crushed, the stock shattered. They found nobody. Because the weight of the snow had compressed everything so completely. Distinguishing my flesh from ice required a forensics team and time they lacked. Sergeant First Class Calvin Briggs handed Rourke the radio log. Missing in action, presumed killed. The language of bureaucratic grief. Rourke initialed it. Then he took his own knife, the K-bar from Kandahar. The one with the compass etched into the pommel. He drove it into the frozen ground at the head of the mound, blade down, handle up. The way men in our line of work mark where the good ones fall. "She doesn't get across?" Hansen asked. Rourke told him she got a knife. He said I'd want the knife. He wasn't sure that was true. He wasn't sure he knew what I would have wanted. Because I was never the kind of person who told you what I wanted. I told you what you needed. I gave you wind speed and hold points, and whether the target would move left or right before he ever did. I never said what I wanted. All Rourke knew was that I was 29 years old. I was the best long-range shooter he had ever seen. He had seen many. Looking back, my record stood at 2,940 meters and change. My reputation began during a mission in eastern Finland that officially never happened. I spoke 4 languages, though none were for casual conversation. I handled words like I handled a rifle, with precision and nothing else. I still carry the scar on my jaw from a fragment hit in Murmansk. Back then, I would click my tongue twice before taking a difficult shot. It was so quiet that only those standing right beside me ever heard it. In 4 years serving with his unit, I never once asked to be relieved. According to the paperwork tucked in Rourke's pocket that day, I was dead. He stood there, looking at my knife handle, rising from the cold snow. The compass on my pommel caught the gray light, throwing a pale reflection across the ice. He stared at it, certain that I did not deserve to die in that way. He knew the thought was irrational. People simply died the way they died. The mountain did not care about being fair, neither did the enemy we faced. He turned away, ordering the team to move toward staging. No one argued with him. They filed back through the pass in a tight, single line. They followed boot prints that were already disappearing under the drifting white powder. By the time they reached the tree line, my burial mound was completely invisible. By morning, my marker knife would be buried deep under the new snow. Soon, that mound would look like any other part of the white, silent landscape. But Derek Rourke, bringing up the rear, never once looked back at me. It was not because of grief, but because some instinctive part of his mind, the part that survived by trusting the unexplainable, was still listening to the mountain. He was listening to the mountain. It was quiet, but not the quiet of a grave. It was something else. He could not name it, so he just kept walking. 72 hours later, the silence on that mountain was long gone. The mission brief was simple, exactly the kind of thing Rourke learned to distrust. A recon element of 4 soldiers under Lieutenant Garrett Cole had gone silent. They went dark in Hartvik Valley, 12 kilometers south of the Nordvik Pass. Their last transmission was 17 hours ago. A massive storm was moving in. A Category 4 whiteout was rapidly developing from the north. It was expected to hold for 48 hours. Rourke said, "We go in now." Captain Rachel Morse, a thin woman from intelligence, led the briefing. She slid a satellite image forward. Their last known position was the valley floor. There is an old fire observation post located right there. We believe Cole's team sheltered there during the first front. But there is a sniper. Rourke said it like a fact. Captain Morse did not even blink. Call sign Ghost of the Ridge, an enemy sniper, one of their absolute best. He had been hunting those mountain passes for 8 weeks, with 7 confirmed kills. Each hit occurred in identical conditions, low visibility and high wind. Morse paused, noting he picks his days carefully. Rourke just studied the image. The valley was a natural granite bowl, with walls rising on 3 sides. The only way in was through a narrow corridor coming from the north. A shooter on the eastern rim would see everything. "How good is he?" Rourke asked. Morse said his longest shot is 2,800 meters using a suppressed system. They had never managed to get a precise fix on where he was hiding. Every engagement, he'd relocate before his acoustic signature could be triangulated. Rourke was thinking of me then, of the fluid certainty I had moving through these mountains. I read terrain the way other people read road signs. He wondered who he'd send against the ghost of the ridge if I were still alive. He put me out of his mind. "Extraction window?" he asked. 6 hours before the whiteout becomes impassable, Morse replied. After that, nobody gets in or out for 48 hours. If Cole's squad is still alive now, they won't be in 48 hours. Rourke knew the night valley temperatures. He had handpicked this specific team for the mission. Webb, his best navigator now. Briggs, who was always steady under heavy fire. Corporal Dana Fitch, the team's field medic. Cole's people had been out there without support for 17 hours, and Rourke wasn't naive enough to expect them to be uninjured. And 3 more. Private First Class Joel Hargreave, Owen Flynn, the specialist, and Staff Sergeant Nathan Hollis, the team's communication expert. Hollis wore a smirk Rourke never trusted and could never quite find reason to hate. 7 souls. The same number who stood over my empty grave. Rourke noticed, but said nothing. They inserted via helicopter to a position 4 kilometers north of the valley entrance, just beyond the ghost's expected engagement range. The bird flew low and fast. Pilots worked the rotors in near silence against the rising mountain wind. A 9-second drop. Then the helicopter was gone, vanishing back into that gray sky. 7 of them were standing in waist-deep powder, with 12 kilometers to cover, while the weather closed in like a freezing fist. They moved in a spread formation, Webb on point, Rourke center, Hollis trailing. The snow ate the sound. Their footsteps were silent. Radio comms were cut down to short 3-word bursts. because even encrypted signals can be detected by direction-finding equipment. And the ghost of the ridge, whatever else he was, had shown a remarkable ability to anticipate our movement patterns. Hour 2. The valley entrance appeared. Webb signaled for the halt. "Contact report," Webb whispered into the radio. "East Ridge, approximately 11 o'clock from the valley throat." Rourke spoke softly. He knew the ghost would be high, looking down into the approach. 300 meters of open ground before the first rock formation on the left. Anyone who crosses that open ground is in his lane. "Then nobody crosses it," Briggs said. "But Cole's people are in that valley." Rourke didn't answer. He didn't have to. Briggs already knew. They pushed left toward the rocks, rushing in 2-second bursts, then freezing. The wind was screaming now, rattling icy branches. Between the gusts, the silence was heavy and absolute. Rourke never took his eyes off that eastern ridge. He watched the heights. The first shot arrived without warning, the way the best ones do. It missed. It struck the ice right in front of Hargreaves' boot, throwing a geyser of frozen crystals into his startled face. Hargreaves stumbled. That was a range shot, a calibration. "Down!" Rourke yelled. They hit the deck. Snow filled his mouth. He heard the wind. He heard nothing else. No report, no echo, and nothing to triangulate. The ghost of the ridge had fired from somewhere far above them. You and I both know the mountains swallowed the sound. My second shot followed. My round took Flynn in the shoulder. He didn't scream, he was tough, but he dropped hard. Fitch was across to him in a combat crawl before Rourke could order it. "How bad?" Rourke asked. "Through and through," Fitch said. "He is mobile." I didn't fire a third time. That was worse. Waiting is its own death. They were pinned against the rock formation, 6 of them belly down in the snow. Flynn propped against the granite, while Fitch packed the trauma dressing into the wound. I hadn't fired again, which meant they thought I was relocating or waiting for a target. Both were bad. Rourke was counting the variables. 1 enemy sniper, position unknown, elevated. Sightlines covered the only way out. 4 men alive in the valley maybe. A whiteout building, 0 fire support. Their own team sniper, me, had been buried in an avalanche 3 days before. Looking back, he only had a 7.62 rifle and 0 good options. "Wind will diffuse it in 4 seconds at this rate," Webb warned him. "Then we move in 4 seconds," Rourke said. Briggs' voice was flat. They couldn't move. Then my shot came, but not from above, from the left. From the southern ridge. Nobody watched it because they thought no one was there. The sound hit half a second after the impact. I was a long way off. Rourke's mind did the math automatically. At that altitude, at that freezing temperature, a rifle's report travels at about 330 meters per second. A half-second delay meant 165 meters between me and him. No, he was wrong. The delay was longer. The wind had tricked his ears. He looked toward the eastern ridge. That ghost was no longer a threat. The enemy lay in the snow, visible for just a fraction of a second. Then the wind shifted and the snow curtain closed. He hadn't just fallen. He had simply ceased to be upright. One moment there, the next moment gone. I'd taken a headshot from the south, from somewhere that made no sense. Rourke stared my way. Nothing but white, empty granite and scoured snowfields. Nothing. "What was that?" Hargreave asked. Not a single soul answered him. Webb was computing. "The southern ridge is at least 3,200 meters. From my position, it was more. You cannot hit a stationary target like that. Not at 3,200 meters in a crosswind. It's an impossible shot." "Somebody just did," Fitch whispered. Rourke's hand went straight for his radio. I watched his thumb hover over the transmit button, but he didn't press it. Whatever was on that ridge, me, had just saved every single one of their lives. You don't call out to things you don't understand. You just listen. The wind died for exactly 3 seconds. In that tiny window, I sent it. Piercing the silence from high to the south, they heard my signal. 2 short pulses, a pause, 1 long, a pause, then 2 short again. Rourke's blood ran cold, then hot. He recognized my signature pattern immediately. He hadn't heard it in 72 hours. He never expected to hear it again. "That's Briggs," he started. "Don't," Rourke snapped. "Captain, that's her signal." I said don't, but he was moving. I sent the signal one more time. Same pattern, south and high. I felt the world tilt on its axis then. "You and I know that shot came from their own." He moved toward me. I guided them along the western wall's base. The terrain offered perfect natural cover. I knew exactly where they were. I knew how to lead them without being seen. Rourke wouldn't even let himself think my name. He buried that hope and moved on pure instinct. Instinct is all we have when our logic turns into static. They hugged the western wall, low, weapons up. Flynn leaned on Hargreave, barely mobile. Fitch's morphine was the only thing keeping him functional. The whiteout chased them. The northern sky turned the color of an eraser. If they didn't find what they were after in 2 hours, there would be nothing left. Only the storm would remain. I fired another shot from the south ridge with no target. Just a signal, come this way. The path ahead was buried under 6 inches of powder. A natural staircase carved into the cliff, hidden from anyone looking up. Rourke never knew it existed. He wouldn't have found it in 3 hours of searching. I was guiding them. After my third shot, Webb led them around the granite and into a rock depression. A hollow where the cliff curved in. It sheltered me from the wind on 3 sides. The air dropped 4 degrees just because the wind stopped hitting me. It was -26, but it felt warm. I sat at the back of the hollow. I was barely visible against the stone, just a shape leaning back. My rifle was across my thighs. Not my H&H, a different one. I'd scavenged it. My head was back, eyes open, and I was covered in blood. Briggs reached me first and dropped to one knee. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "She's breathing." Rourke crossed to me in 4 steps. He crouched down and looked me in the eye. I looked right back at him. My right eye was swollen shut, the skin purple-black. It was blunt force trauma. I'd been hit by ice or rock or debris. My left eye was open and steady. It held that same flat look. Looking back, I know I was staring through him like he was just another target in a scope. Blood from a scalp wound had stopped flowing down the left side of my face. It was frozen in a dark streak from my temple to my jaw. I held my left arm against my chest in a makeshift sling. I'd made it from strips of my own ghillie wrap. My radius was snapped at an angle that clearly made Rourke's stomach turn. I'd been out there for 72 hours. You and I both know I set that bone myself. I climbed that ridge with one eye and a rifle I'd taken from the dead. He didn't know where I got it, but I made the shot. 3,200 meters, crosswinds, a Category 3 storm. I still made it. I looked at him and said, my voice flat and whispering, "You buried my rifle." "We buried what we thought was you," Rourke told me. That was a $12,000 system. "Elena, I want it back." He just stared at me. Then something inside him snapped. He'd been holding his breath for 72 hours. He looked away for 2 seconds, then back. "Fitch," he snapped, "now." Fitch was fast and quiet. That's why she's good. Celine on my head wound. The wound opened again. My jaw tightened in pain. I didn't make a sound. She checked my eyes, right side first, then left. My right eye was still there, Fitch decided, but my orbital rim was shattered. That side was all shadows, but my left eye was sharp and fully functional. Functional enough to have pulled off the hardest shot any of them had seen. My arm was the real problem. A clean transverse fracture through the radius, Fitch noted. As good as breaks get, I suppose, but the bone ends had shifted. I'd fashioned a splint using a rod I stripped from my own rifle case. Before I buried the case, I used strips of ghillie wrap for binding. It was a textbook splint. Fitch studied my work before she spoke, her voice low. "You did this yourself." I told her no one else was there to help. She asked if it hurt. Of course it did. Now she had to realign it. "Do it," I said. As she moved, I hissed a single controlled breath. My left hand found a rock, fingers pressing flat against the cold stone. My knuckles turned white, and then I went perfectly still again. It felt like I'd passed through fire and come out the other side. Rourke leaned against the far wall of the hollow, watching me with intensity. He was piecing it together. He knew I'd been up in my hide position. When the avalanche triggered, that massive wall of snow collapsed on the eastern side. It didn't hit me directly, but the pressure wave was enough to throw me. I went flying off the ridgeline, straight down the steep western face. I fell 20 or 30 meters before a jagged subridge finally caught me. That impact shattered my arm and crushed the orbital rim of my right eye. I was only partially buried, not the deep grave they had all assumed. Still, it took 30 minutes of methodical digging with my one good hand. I had nothing to help me. My radio had been crushed in the fall. No primary weapon, just an emergency kit with the bare tactical basics. Water purification, fire starter, and a thermal blanket the size of a playing card. My first aid kit had nothing for a broken radius, nothing at all. I had 400 rounds of .338 in a pouch. I'd kept that ammo through the fall. Rourke asked where I'd found the rifle. I looked at him. The ghost of the ridge had a hide on the southern summit. He'd been there 6 weeks. I found old ration wrappers dating back to October. He'd cached a secondary weapon there, a Tokarev, an old Russian system. .338 Lapua with a long suppressor and modified trigger. It was actually decent. Briggs couldn't believe I used an enemy rifle. I used what I had to take a 3,200-meter shot. Rourke spoke up. I looked at him with my one good eye. 3,340, I corrected. I'd had time to range it. Silence followed. I looked back at Rourke and told him about Cole's element. There are 4 in the valley. 3 can move, 1 has a leg wound. The ghost had them pinned 2 days ago. Then he took his shot. Afterward, he waited at the valley entrance for anyone coming to help. Classic containment. But I knew he wouldn't be doing that anymore. "We move once Fitch is done," Rourke said. I told him I was coming. He looked at me, at my broken arm. I still remember my ruined eye, and the rifle I'd carried up that mountain with a broken arm. He didn't argue. We moved out at 1400 hours, a wall of white-out building right behind us. I walked at Rourke's side, my Tokarev slung back, keeping my good arm free. I moved slowly then, lacking my usual fluid efficiency, but steady. Whatever pain I was managing, I kept it buried deep inside, inaccessible. That was just how I handled everything back then. Rourke waited until we were far enough ahead that the others couldn't hear his voice. "The explosion," he said. "Tell me exactly what happened." I didn't answer him right away. I just scanned the terrain ahead of us, cataloging it the way I always did, exits, elevations, and every scrap of cover and concealment. Then, 20 minutes before the avalanche hit, I picked up a transmission on the emergency frequency not meant for me. They didn't know I was on it. I paused. Someone had given away our position in the past. Grid coordinates, precise ones, more accurate than any satellite imagery could ever give you. Someone gave them to the enemy. Someone who'd been sitting in our mission briefing. Rourke realized. Someone who had full access to our movement plan. He felt a coldness deeper than the mountain air. "You know who?" he asked. I had a strong suspicion. My voice held no anger, just the flat, cold precision I used for everything back then. I need a closer look before I start saying names. I need to see one more thing. What thing? He asked. I just glanced at him. My left eye, the only one that still worked, remained steady, giving away nothing. I'll know it when I see it. Rourke didn't push. He had learned over those 4 years that pushing me when I had decided on timing was like pushing a granite wall. The information would only come when I had decided the time was right. He was thinking about Hollis then, running the calendar backward in his mind. Hollis had joined our unit 14 months ago. Assigned through standard rotation, clean background, and performance reviews that were adequate, never exceptional. Never exceptional. Rourke realized then that should have been a major red flag. You didn't get assigned to a unit like ours just by being adequate back then. You got in by being the best. Hollis was good at comms and operational protocols then. Good at being unremarkable. He was exactly what you would need to be if someone had placed you there deliberately. The watch on his wrist. Those transmissions on the wrong frequency. Those precise grid coordinates that required intimate knowledge of our movement plans. Knowledge that came from the briefing room, not from the field. Rourke wondered who else was in that chain, who else had been bought or coerced. He thought about Captain Morse and the careful way she had handled the satellite imagery. He thought about the intelligence officer before her, the one who'd briefed the Nordvik mission. He thought about all the invisible hands moving information, and how many of those hands had their prices. How deep does it go? He asked. I remained quiet for a long moment. Ice crystals drifted across the surface of the snow beside my boot. I don't know, I said. Hollis is just the only mechanism I can prove. The people who paid him, that is a different investigation. I paused. I'm a sniper. I deal in distances I can range. Fair, Rourke said. We just kept moving. We reached the valley entrance at 14:30. The corridor was 40 meters wide at its narrowest point. It was the killing ground the Ghost once covered so effectively. With him gone, it was just a corridor. We crossed it in 20 seconds. We were fast, fanning out as we hit the valley floor. The observation post sat 200 meters ahead of us. I saw stone walls and a roof collapsing under heavy snow load. Smoke rose from the chimney. I knew Cole's people had fire. They were alive. I saw Rourke finally exhale after many long hours. He keyed the radio. Cole, this is Rourke. Come in. We are 200 meters south of you. Show us a signal. A pause. Then a flashlight blinked 3 times from the window slit. Move up, Rourke said. As we approached, I started to drop back. Rourke noticed, but he kept moving. He knew I was watching something. He didn't break formation. He trusted me. At 40 meters out, I took a short, controlled breath, the kind you take right before certainty arrives. He noted it. Then he knocked on the stone wall with his rifle. A warped wooden door, draped with a thermal blanket, opened from inside. Cole appeared, exhausted, frostbitten, and alive. That was all that mattered then. God, Cole said. I didn't think. Save it, Rourke told him. 4 men, 3 walking. Marsh has a wound in his left thigh. He's been tending the fire. Fitch moved past us into the post. The others followed her. Rourke stood in the doorway, looking back. He looked across the valley floor. I stood at the southern edge. I was very still, my eyes locked on Staff Sergeant Nathan Hollis. Hollis stared at the ground. It was barely above freezing inside. But after the valley, that small room felt like the tropics. Cole briefed Rourke on the situation in flat, economical sentences. They were on a standard recon route when the first contact came. The ghost took Corporal Aldea instantly. Single shot, no warning at all. They stayed pinned down, unable to move without becoming easy targets. They had 4 days of rations and 1 working radio left. The battery died 17 hours ago. We heard the shot, Cole said. The one that took him down. I didn't understand where it came from. Neither did we, Rourke replied. By then, I had stepped inside. I stood near the eastern wall, my Tokarev leaning against my thigh. I was watching Hollis. He had positioned himself near the door. It was a tactical choice. He wanted to be near the exit. He was checking his weapon, staying busy with the optics rail. He hadn't acknowledged me once since we entered, not even once. Usually, people stare for 30 seconds when they see me alive. Hollis didn't look up. Rourke watched me watching him. I felt cold. "Any issues with our route?" Rourke asked Hollis, keeping his voice casual. Hollis looked up. "I sent the standard confirmation signal during insertion, sir." "That is SOP. Primary tactical," I said from the wall. Our primary tactical channel had been burned back at Nordvik. We moved to secondary for this job, per the brief. Then came that silence. "Secondary," Hollis corrected himself. I misspoke. My one good eye never left him. I told him his radio logs would prove exactly where that signal went. Not the one he claimed to use. He went quiet, then slowly lowered his rifle. It was slow, careful, not the movement of a man who was just tired. Not someone setting it down because his arms were heavy. He had simply decided that a firearm was no longer his best option. Rourke whispered for Cole to clear the room. Cole was a pro. He knew. He didn't ask questions, he just moved. "Hollis," Rourke said, "we need to discuss Nordvik." What followed was fast, the way these things usually are. Hollis bolted left. He was fast, faster than Rourke had ever anticipated. He threw the door open and made it exactly 1 step out. The biting cold rushed in. He froze. I was already waiting for him. I had slipped around the post before anyone even realized I was gone. Through the rear wall gap and across that frozen, crusted ground. I was standing 6 meters ahead in that gray afternoon light, snub-nose in hand. It was angled but not raised. My one working eye was fixed on him. "You sold us out," I said. Hollis stayed silent, breath huffing in the air. "You knew the pass, you knew the timing, you knew my hide position." Looking back, my voice had that same flat, clinical precision. No heat, no accusation, just the facts. They paid you to trap us there. He claimed ignorance, but I had spotted that new tactical watch he was wearing. Military-grade GPS integration, the kind that broadcasts on a very specific frequency. One that never messes with standard comms. I took a breath. The ghost wasn't tracking us by the terrain. He was following your signal. His jaw clenched. I saw something shift in his eyes, not exactly guilt. It was the look of a man watching every exit slam shut, one by one. "That frequency," he muttered. "You can't read those signals with standard field gear." "True," I replied, "but during those 3 nights we spent back in Nordvik, I caught an intermittent bleed coming through on our satellite uplink channel. A 4-digit burst transmission every 12 hours. I ran the timing against the ghost's windows. I tilted my head slightly. They were a perfect match. Hollis looked at the ground and finally went slack. "How much?" Rourke asked from the door. Hollis stayed silent. What was the price? Rourke's voice was low. That was worse than anger. You can fight anger, but that quiet, it just builds and builds. What was the price of 5 soldiers? How much was I worth? He looked me in the eye. I saw something, not remorse, but something close. The raw discomfort of a man facing the concrete results of a cold decision. He had sold our coordinates and position reports. He likely never let himself picture the human at the end of that data. Standing in that snow now, facing the woman staring back with one ruined eye and the shattered arm. Looking back, I see him forced to imagine my steadiness, the woman who survived his kill shot. He didn't find the vision very comfortable. 6 figures, Hollis said. American. Silence. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, Rourke said, once we're back. Be grateful we're making that possible. Hollis looked my way again. I hadn't moved or blinked. My TAC-50 sat at my side, unraised, which was somehow far more terrifying. You should have died, he said. No malice, just pure wonder. I know, I replied. I decided not to. Rourke moved toward Hollis, pulling zip ties from his tactical vest. Hands back, standard protocol. Hollis didn't put up a fight. His hands were steady. He'd clearly planned for this failure and found some peace with it. The calm of a gambler who knew he had finally lost. Rourke marched him back. Within 2 minutes, Hollis was zip-tied and seated against the outer wall. Hollis didn't resist. All the fight had drained out of him. Or maybe he'd just run the math and realized his odds were 0. While the rest of the team finished, I went back inside the post and leaned against the wall. Rourke sat down across from me. Between us, a small fire flickered within a ring of stone. Orange light hit my face, turning the frozen blood on my jaw nearly black. Tell me about those 72 hours, he said. I stayed silent for a beat. The fire crackled. When the snow finally settled, I was 12 meters below the ridge. Torso and legs buried, head above the snow. The lucky version. I paused. My arm snapped during the fall before I went under. The initial pressure wave was what did the real damage. Something struck my face. You can imagine, digging myself out took time. The snow was thick, but it hadn't fully packed yet. I had my hands free and used the boot knife from my kit. It survived because it's small. You should have stayed put, Rourke said. You should have called for help. Radio was dead, and I'd heard the transmission. I looked over at him. I knew we'd been targeted. I just didn't know by whom. If I'd returned to staging, I wouldn't have known who to trust. Rourke felt that weight. Looking back, I spent 3 days alone, not just because I was stranded physically, but because I didn't know which of us was the enemy. So you stayed out there. I found the Ghost secondary hide on the South Summit during a mission weeks ago. It was my contingency. His cache was there, 400 rounds of .338. My arm, now secure in Fitch's splint, looked clean and stark white. I made the climb on day 2, once the weather cleared. Set my position. Then I waited, for my team, for the perfect moment. I looked him in the eye. You were going to come back. 4 people were alive in that valley. You were coming for them, regardless of the storm's fury. A beat passed. I know how you think. He said nothing. The Ghost was on the eastern ridge the night before you arrived. I tracked his setup through my scope for 9 hours before you hit the valley entrance. I simply waited until he engaged. I needed him to commit, to stay still and focused. I paused. I'd spent the whole night calculating that crosswind at that distance and elevation. The temperature difference between the southern and eastern ridges creates a complex layered wind structure. You don't just compensate for the surface wind. I had to estimate the wind at every altitude band the round pierced. 3,340 meters. Rourke repeated the distance. Manageable. He sat there staring at me across the fire. I stared back, one eye open, bloodied, my arm in a splint, holding myself with that same still certainty I have always had. Like being buried alive and climbing a mountain with a broken arm in a whiteout. To make an impossible shot. It was simply what the situation required, and I met it. "Why the whistle?" he asked. "Why not just radio us once you knew Hollis was out of danger?" I didn't want to explain it over a radio he might be monitoring. I paused. "And I needed you to follow me to the hollow. I needed you to see the condition I was in before the approach. So you'd understand the margin was real. The margin. If I had miscalculated, if the shot had missed, I needed you to know I'd been here, what I'd done, and why, in case it failed." I looked back at the fire. It worked. Rourke stayed quiet for a long while as the wind picked up outside. The whiteout was arriving. Through the door gap, I saw the snow moving sideways. Relentless and horizontal, gray light shifting into the flat, textureless white of a full-ground blizzard. We were stuck there for the night, at minimum, possibly longer. "You're going to be okay," he finally said to me. "I know," I told him. No arrogance, just that same flat certainty. As though the question had been answered for me a long time ago. In the dark, under the snow, I was simply reporting the final result. The whiteout hit at 1800 hours and was merciless all through the night. We burned every scrap of combustible material we could find. Broken furniture from the post interior, the wooden door frame, a damaged rifle stock from Cole's equipment. The fire stayed alive, all 9 of us, Rourke's team. Cole's element and Hollis zip-tied and separate. We all stayed alive with it. Cold and still, and very much alive. In those pre-dawn hours, the storm exhausted itself, and the wind dropped to something merely brutal. He found me outside, standing in fresh powder with the tactical rifle in my good hand, looking south. "What is it?" he whispered. I didn't answer for a moment, just watched. Then I said, "Ghost of the Ridge." He isn't a solo operator. He never was. The way they contained Cole's element was too precise for just one person. You need a forward observer to call in those adjustments, especially when the shooter can't see the impact point. I paused for a moment. I accounted for one. His observer's been out there since yesterday, watching, waiting to see if we survived. Rourke reached for his radio. "Don't," I said quietly. "Any transmission confirms that we are here. If he thinks the storm killed us, we've got a window." He lowered the device. "He's on the northern rim," I said. "Look there, 3 o'clock from the valley exit, that formation like a broken tooth leaning east." I watched Rourke scan the horizon. He saw nothing, only rock and snow and that pale pre-dawn light. But he'd learned never to doubt what I could see. "Range?" he asked. 1,400 meters. "Manageable," I told him. I looked at my broken arm. The problem was everything else. I was right. I had been running that accounting in my head since the hollow. What I had, the cost, what remained. My arm was splinted but useless. My right eye was dark, a shadow where my vision used to be. I had been awake essentially for 3 days straight. I had hit the longest shot of my career and hiked 12 kilometers since. The body keeps a ledger. Eventually, it always presents the bill. I stared at the northern rim for a long time. "Rourke," I said, "I need you to do something for me." He waited. "Just stay exactly here. Do not move. Don't make a sound. Do not reach for your radio." I looked at him. If my math is right, the observer will try to fix our position on the post before dawn to report back. He has to move within 20 minutes or the light becomes too clear for him. I paused. When he moves, he will break the skyline at the eastern edge. That formation for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds at exactly 1,400 meters. Rourke muttered, "One eye, one arm." But the Taiga nose is a left-hand system. I had been shooting it left-handed since the day I found it. I looked down at my rifle. The arm didn't need to support the weapon. Just stabilize it. I had the rock. I gestured with my chin. Toward the outer wall of the post, a flat stone ledge at chest height, angled toward the northern rim as if it were positioned specifically for this. Rourke looked at the stone, at me, the rifle, and my one eye. It remained focused and steady and alive. "You have been setting this up," he said, "since before dawn." "Since midnight," I told him. I prepped the rock support and ranged the target while the storm covered me. A slight pause. I had time. He was quiet, thinking about that midnight. About me standing alone outside the post in the absolute dark. A mountain whiteout, -20-degree temperatures, and a broken arm. Ranging a target that didn't exist yet because I decided it would by dawn. Planning the geometry of a shot I wasn't certain I would need to make. Preparing for it anyway. Preparation is the only honest response to uncertainty. He considered those 72 hours, the specific brutal texture of that experience. Buried in frozen snow, one eye dark, radio dead, inside a combat zone. Knowing the people who might come looking had already tried to kill me. He tried to find the moment where most people would have just stopped. The moment where the cost finally exceeds what the body is willing to sustain. He couldn't find it. For me, that moment simply did not exist. In the internal logic of my decision-making, there was only the situation. There was what the situation required. You either met it or you didn't. I had met it without an audience, without any witness or acknowledgement. No chance of recognition. Under a mountain, alone, in the dark. He felt that. It was heavy and clean. "What do you need?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just don't move." I settled against the stone and pulled the rifle to my left shoulder. My broken right arm, held in its splint, pressed hard against that stone support. I wasn't gripping the weapon, just resting it like a counterweight. My one eye found the scope. We waited. The sky lightened by degrees, the gray turning into a pale wash. I watched the mountains emerge from the darkness in the solid, jagged forms. The snow caught the rising light, and the world turned silver and perfectly still. At 6 minutes past dawn, something moved on the northern rim. A shape, a silhouette. A man was crossing that broken tooth of rock at the valley edge. He moved in a crouch, thinking the storm had done his work. I clicked my tongue twice. Then I fired. The sound rolled across the valley, swallowed whole by the silent mountains. Just like that, the shape on the northern rim ceased to exist. I lowered the rifle and finally stepped back from that cold stone support. I stood there for a moment before I sat down in the snow, heavily. The body ledger had been presented and I was paying it. Rourke reached me in 2 steps. He didn't say a word. He just sat next to me, his shoulder pressed firmly against mine. He waited. After a long moment, I finally said, "That is twice now." "Twice what?" "Twice I have sat down in the snow when I did not mean to." "I dislike it," I told him. "I know," he said. The sun rose, but not quickly. It rose slowly, the way mountain suns do, edging just above the eastern ridge. Everything turned gold and orange, briefly warm. Looking back, I remember how that snow glittered. The valley lay white and empty, while the post behind us held 8 people, all still alive. It felt small and solid and real. I sat there, shoulder to shoulder with Rourke. I watched the sun come up. My eye was open and my breathing was slow and even. The Tiger rifle lay across my knees. "You will need surgery on that arm," Rourke said. "I know. And the eye?" "I know. They are going to ground you." There was a long pause as the sun climbed. "Temporarily," I told him. He didn't argue. Over 4 years, he had learned that some things were not worth the breath. They extracted us at 0900 hours the very next morning. The helicopters came in low, 2 birds this time, using the improved visibility to move. With practiced efficiency, Cole's people went first, Marsh on a litter, the others walking toward extraction. Then came Hollis, cuffed and under guard, wearing the expression of a man defeated by math. He had run his calculations and found the outcome was now unavoidable. Rourke sent his team on the second bird, then stood outside the post for one final moment. He looked north, then south, and then up at the sky. It was perfectly clear. Genuinely clear now, that deep blue of high altitude in the heart of winter. The kind of clarity that only exists after a storm has scoured everything soft away. The mountains stood there like hard facts, permanent and completely indifferent to us. He walked back through the valley, heading toward the northern corridor. Through that corridor and north, following the base of those western cliffs. 2 kilometers until the terrain opened up, the path curving east toward the cold Nordvik Pass. He walked through the pass. Eventually, he found the exact place. The knife was still there, his K-bar, blade down in the ice, handle pointing skyward. The snow around it had shifted and settled over 72 hours of brutal mountain weather. And now the mound looked different. It wasn't really a mound at all. Just a slightly irregular surface, a suggestion of disturbance in an otherwise featureless field of snow. If you didn't know what to look for, you and I would walk right past it. I remember him crouching over my knife, just staring at it. My ghillie wrap was still under the snow, next to my wrecked rifle case. All the evidence of a position I held until it was obliterated. Then I climbed out. He was doing the math in his head, me buried under that packed snow. One eye gone dark, arms snapped, radio dead, alone in the freezing cold. Trapped beneath the mountain in the middle of a literal combat zone. Knowing the unit I was covering had pulled out and wasn't coming back. Even if I reached the surface, I knew I had nothing left. No weapon, no comms, and no idea which of my own colleagues were trying to kill me. I climbed out anyway. I made a plan, and I made it happen. I took the shot anyway. He pulled the knife out of the ice. He wiped the blade on his sleeve and slid it into its sheath. Back on his hip, where it had lived for 12 years. Then he stood. He stood there for a long time, facing the ground that nearly became my grave. The wind rolled in slow waves across the snowfield, just like I remember, carrying fine crystals that caught the light and vanished into nothing. The mountains above him were white and silent and absolutely massive. They saw everything that happened, but they would never tell my story. Rourke had been doing this kind of work for 15 years. He had stood at real graves, properly dug, properly marked, with flags. With ceremonies that tried to make official what no ritual could ever truly hold. He had also stood at spots like this, improvised markers in the field. A knife in the ice, the only tribute you give when time is short. He had seen too many of both, but this one was different. This one was empty. I had taken my own absence back with me. I wonder now if he knew what that meant to everyone there. To the ones who drove the knife in and said their quiet goodbyes. Did I think about the weight of being mourned and then returning? Or did I just do the next necessary thing in a long sequence? And the weight of it was just something I filed away for later. Probably the second. That was always the way I worked. He turned and started walking back toward the extraction point. Behind him, the surface of the snowfield simply settled into itself. Where my knife had been was now indistinguishable from everything else. Within 2 minutes, the wind erased it. No marker, just the mountain. He was 50 meters into the pass when I signaled him. He stopped. One long, two short. He turned, but the valley looked empty to him. The snowfield was white and still, blue sky above us, mountains silent as always. He listened. Nothing. He stood for 30 seconds watching the empty white distance behind him. Then he turned back around and just kept on walking. He found me at the extraction point, sitting on a gear case. My Tiger rifle was broken down and cleaned despite my splinted arm. I had everything laid out on a blanket with my usual careful order. I was reassembling it left-handed, working without any hurry. Medical is on the second bird, Rourke said. I know. Your arm. I know. He sat down on the gear case right across from me. The rotor wash from the first departing chopper sent a wave of snow across the clearing, then vanished. I watched the rotor sound fade. He spoke of the empty grave. I looked up. He'd just been standing at my burial mound. There was nothing. You would never know anyone had ever been there. I looked at him steadily. Were you really expecting to find something? He thought about it. Honestly, I don't know, he told me. I went back to the rifle, seated the suppressor, and checked the bolt with my thumb. I told him I was there for 72 hours. 2 of them were spent under the snow. For the other 70 hours, I was somewhere else entirely. I didn't answer at first. Then, up, I said simply, without any extra explanation then. I set the assembled rifle aside and looked at the mountain above us. The peak was lost in the hazy residue of the departed storm. Rourke followed my gaze. The mountain simply looked back. We sat in the silence and let the cold and the light and the high air just be what they were. 2 people on a flat rock at the edge of a valley where things happened. Something had been stopped, but the final accounting was incomplete and might always be. In the distance, the second helicopter appeared, a small, dark shape. It grew louder against the blue sky. I stood. I slung the tack-nosed across my back, sliding my good arm through the strap. I adjusted the strap with that precise economy of movement that defined my existence back then. No excess, no waste, no gesture that didn't have a specific purpose. Rourke, I said. He looked at me. I want my Holland & Holland rifle back. When the snow thaws, there won't be anything left. The barrel will be fine. And the action. I looked at him, one eye steady and direct and very much alive. I want it back. He held my gaze. He thought of the knife, the whistle on the wind, and the sheer impossibility of 3,340 meters. In a crosswind with one eye and a broken arm. All right, he said. I nodded once, then walked to the edge of the clearing to meet the helicopter. He watched me as the chopper kicked up a whiteout. When the powder cleared, I was still standing there, steady and unmoved by it all. He thought about Hollis telling him that I should have died. And my answer back then, I simply decided not to. He had heard many things said in hard places, and he usually filed them all away. In the part of his memory kept for the brutal accumulation of experience, I don't think he ever filed that one away. He would carry that memory forward in a part of his mind that stayed easy to reach. Without excavation, the part of him you could just look at. The rotors wound up, snow and ice crystals swirled outward in an expanding circle. I stood at the center of that chaos, composed and still, until I finally moved. I headed for the door, climbed inside, and watched the mountain drop as we lifted. Above the valley, the mountain kept its ancient silence. Somewhere in the wind, or perhaps just in the cold air moving over the granite and snow, there was a sound. 2 short pulses, a pause, then one long signal, faint as a thought. Gone before anyone could be certain it had actually happened. I felt the chopper lift. The peaks remained, and White Echo was just history. Or maybe just the start of a story whispered late at night. Shared by operators who had been to classified zones and seen too much. Strange things with no logic, told in broken sentences and heavy, knowing silences. Shared the way all harsh truths are told. It started with a sniper. Me. They left me for dead under the snow. Yet I returned. The mountain stayed silent, the only witness I ever really needed.